everybody. Welcome to the Q&A Cafe. We're joining you here from the Georgetown Club in Georgetown. And I'm very happy to have you watching at home or on whatever device it may be, and our audience here at the Georgetown Club. And as always, I like to say we're very grateful to Georgetown Cupcake for providing our dessert, which today will allow you to choose which team you support in the Super Bowl.
I hope you got a lot of Rams cupcakes. Speaking as a Patriots,
I'm taking all the Patriots cupcakes from myself.
Yeah, I'll take the other half.
And I think we just showed ourselves who we are.
Right.
But I'm very happy to welcome Mark Leibovich as my guest. I've long wanted to have Mark on the show. As many of you probably know, he is the New York Times Magazine correspondent. Got to make that important distinction. Washington correspondent for the New York Times Magazine, but he's a great journalist and author, and he...
What do you mean, but? I'm a great journalist. And no.
He's a great journalist.
Despite that.
And shook this town when he wrote This Town, and has shaken up the NFL with Big Game. And I recommend it. It's good reading this week leading up to the Super Bowl, but it doesn't have to be just this week. It can be anytime because it is timeless. What I like about both books, or I don't know if this was on purpose or just a coincidence, you start with, both books are about tribes.
Right.
And you start with significant gatherings of the tribes.
Right.
And both, can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes.
Because, and recalling how you start This Town and how you start Big Game.
Well, okay, so just so you know, nothing here is intentional. Everything is a complete coincidence and happy accident. And what you do when you are a reporter and you have all these pages to fill is you write what you have and you hope that you can draw some connections at the end and then eventually make it look like you were planning the whole thing the whole time. But I can now confess that this was all a bit of a happy accident. But the essential theme that you're talking about, which is tribes and clubs, is something that overlays both life in Washington in the 21st century and life in the National Football League in the 20th century. And these are essentially the two big reality shows of American life right now. Football, the National Football League, and politics. And it is one big circus, and eventually they would collide. But This Town, which came out in 2013, the idea originally was to sort of follow the life in Washington right after everything was supposed to change when Barack Obama was elected. And the first scene there was like 10,000 words, essentially, on Tim Russert's funeral. That was the end of an era. I mean, you know, and you work at Meet the Press with Chuck, and like there's a whole full circle thing going on here. But Tim's departure was such a seminal moment in the life of this town and the media and politics and sort of the arrival of the internet and social media and just all this change that was supposedly going on. And you had all these usual suspects, and that was sort of the first real set piece where I introduced a lot of the usual suspects in Washington, a lot of the same power brokers and you know, wealth creators and usual suspects that you just sort of see around here. And as it turned out, I needed a break from all this after Donald Trump was elected, because the last election took a lot out of me and I needed to step away or wanted to have like a diversion. So I decided I love football, and football seems to be, you know, like Washington, in an incredibly poignant, kind of precarious moment. And I decided that I would sort of look at this entity, which, you know, has something like 48 of the top 50 top-rated TV shows in the country every year, are football games.
Well, what was in the movie Concussion, and you cite this in your book, there's this wonderful line from Albert Brooks.
Right.
They own Sunday.
They own a day of the week, and it used to be owned by the church.
Right.
And no, I mean, next week, the Super Bowl is probably as close as we have to a secular holiday in this country, where you know, people will gather, and it doesn't really matter, you know, what religion you are, you know, who you're rooting for. There's just like a gathering, and we're all going to be watching, or many people will be watching TV for.
And appropriately, we're rolling into it with a little bit of a controversy, not on the scale of Deflategate, but I guess Refereegate.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the thing about the NFL. I mean, and I know this is a really sort of renegade club here at Georgetown, so I'm just going to swear. But it is this beautiful show of a sports league in that you have everyone paying attention, and yet at the middle of all of this are these monumental screw-ups that sort of add to the reality TV value of this. And on Sunday, there's this game between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams. I don't know how many of you, or if any of you didn't see it, but essentially
I would hope everybody
the game
saw it.
was a decisive blown call by the referees at the end on what was clear to everyone was a pass interference call, which would have essentially won the game for the Saints, was not called, and the Rams went on to win in overtime. And yeah, you have New Orleans and people who are watching the game and people who are betting on the game, or just people who like football are just like, they believe that one of the teams in the Super Bowl shouldn't be there because a referee like egregiously screwed up. And James Carville, who a lot of you might know or know of, I spoke to his class. He called me on Monday. He said, you got to speak to my class at LSU, because he's down in New Orleans. And James is like a huge Saints fan because he's from down there. And he's starting this
in general.
Right, and he was running this campaign to get the commissioner, Roger Goodell, to overturn the call, use his commissioner powers and replay at least like the second half. And I mean, he's got this whole campaign. Anyway, he had me speak to the class, and ostensibly it was going to be about politics because that's what I do. But I don't think we talked like for 2 seconds about politics, and basically it was just James ranting. But that was kind of like an extreme example of like what's been going on at certainly my office this week, and I assume a lot of other water coolers around.
Yeah, I mean, I think also, at least I personally felt robbed of having Drew Brees opposite Tom Brady. I think.
Yeah.
For a lot of us, that felt like
it would have been. There's no question. But
do you want to see Tom retire after this?
No way, man. I mean,
Really?
I'm a look. So before, and please, like, when I make this confession, which I already did, but I'm a Patriots fan. I
am
grew
too.
up
So
there.
we've got two
and
Pats
by the way,
fans sitting
don't
here.
leave immediately. Like, at least
And this
hear us
wasn't
out.
organized.
We're two of the good ones.
When we planned
are,
this, we did not know they were going to be in the Super Bowl.
And it's a birthright. Well, we probably assumed they were going to
My
be.
mother,
Sorry,
my mother was born there.
I was born there. I grew up there, and it's like it's like an addiction. You don't, you just sort of born with it, and you can't. I mean, I try to adopt teams, but I can't. I mean, so you're born with something.
Can I tell you how I came to the Pats, though? Because it's...
Yes, but I'm worried about the audience because they probably all hate the Pats.
No, well, let them.
There are a couple. Okay, we saw one hand.
I came to the Pats through Deflategate.
Oh, that's cool.
And also, I had been orphaned by my team, the Redskins.
Okay, so you are like an active anti-Redskins person.
I am now, yes.
Okay.
And so I was orphaned, and I was
Okay.
looking for a new home. And Deflategate happened, and it so outraged me that I said, this is my new team.
What a great decision you made. Thank you. I mean, that was talk about a witch hunt.
I don't know.
In fact, actually, when all that was going on, I was writing a profile of then Republican frontrunner Donald Trump, who was always dropping the name of Tom Brady because they knew each other, and he would always say, that witch hunt against him. So that was the original witch hunt, at least that I've.
I loved one of the reviews of your book. It said Mark Leibovich may be the only person to conduct interviews inside both the White House and Tom Brady's top floor Manhattan apartment.
That was true, and in his living room. Yeah, no, it was a rarefied sort of travel for me because I said in the book that I've interviewed presidents and major candidates and foreign leaders and stuff and celebrities and I'd never been more nervous or starstruck than when I walked into Tom Brady's house. I was like a blithering idiot. And there's something about sports heroes that makes you want to sort of resort to the nostalgia of your youth, right? And just sort of there's like a kind of innocence. Like I want these people who are athletes to be something else, and I don't really know how to act around them. I know how to act around politicians.
I have a feeling you did fine. I particularly liked the email that you received from him with the subject line, Tom Brady here.
Yeah, I thought it was a gag.
I think I'm going to start using that with every
totally
email
should.
I write to people.
Mitt Romney, by the way, when he, in the interregnum before he lost the presidential campaign and then ran for Senate, he was recognized all over the place. I remember I did a story on him in 2014, and he was he didn't know what he was going to do with his life, and people were recognizing him, and he was campaigning for some Republican candidate in Arkansas, and people kept coming up to him, and they couldn't really place him, and he said, "I just tell people I'm Tom Brady," which I thought was kind of funny. Brady's like, actually good looking enough to be a Romney son.
Well, were you able in meeting him and knowing the reputation and the aura and the GOAT and all of that and your own fandom and then dealing with him one-on-one, how were you able to break down the mystique and what did you make of him?
I didn't.
Is he larger than life? I mean, does he deserve the adoration? Is he?
I think as a football player, as a human being, he's quite, despite his superhuman sort of good looks and wealth and supermodel life and incredible career and all of that, despite all of that, he's really quite normal. And that sounds absurd to say, but he really is. I mean, he's just someone who is pretty private, not the most talkative person in the world, not the most, he's not going to say, he's
controlled.
He's controlled, but I thoroughly enjoy talking to him. I mean, beyond just like the novelty of it. He's a decent guy. I know a lot of his friends now. I'm very good friends with his dad.
Well, I was just going to say, interestingly, it's his father
Tom
who
Senior,
is in the book almost as much as Tom, who is like the Tom Whisperer for you.
He is, and he's also the sort of id to Tom's like controlled
Very
super
different.
ego. Yeah, but I mean, even like Tom Senior, like during the Chiefs game the other day, was like texting me saying, I can tell right now that the Chiefs are right about to choke. And they didn't choke, but it was like, why is Tom Brady's dad texting me? It's just a weird thing where I continue to sort of ask myself, how did I get here? But no, it's like it says in my little text, Tom Brady Sr. He calls himself the original Tom Brady. So.
I thought it was interesting, and I don't know if this is still the case, that Brady's parents, Tom Sr. and his and Mrs. Brady, stopped going to away games. Does that continue to this day?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think part of it is after Deflategate, just his son got so much abuse. I mean, like his son, it's an away football game, you're going to get abuse. But no, just like the people holding cheaters like signs up.
Yeah.
Tom Sr. is, he always says, I have Irish Alzheimer's. I forget everything except the grudges. And he is he's just very emotional. Takes these things very personal, far more than I think his son does. And it just upset him too much. Plus, at that, his wife was being treated for cancer during that season and the season after that I was reporting the book. So there's
is
that.
She better now? Is she
I think she is better.
Yeah.
They don't seem to be traveling to a lot of the games because they live in California. They're now pretty well up there. They're in like the late 70s. But I did a book event in San Francisco. And they live in Silicon Valley, probably about maybe 40 minutes from San Francisco. And Tom Sr. had been in Boston at a Patriots game, flew all day, and instead of driving south to their house in San Mateo, he actually came north to support the book after after he landed, after flying all day at the age of 78 or something. So I thought it was awesome. Yeah. And he's one of the few people around the Patriots who still likes me. Because the book was pretty hard on the team. I didn't particularly like a lot of the people.
You're very upfront about your fanboy status, but then you the shiv. The book is not so much about the players though, as much as it is about management and ownership. And the ownership is especially fascinating because there are 32 owners.
32 owners, yeah.
And it seems that by and large, they are, they are not an attractive group of people.
No, not at all.
And and the way they behave and the things they say, and you read it and you're trying to figure out how can these people be smart enough to be rich enough to own these teams.
It certainly demystifies the idea that you need to have some special something to have a lot of money and to
it may not be an attractive special something. There's something you've got to have, but they are, I guess, at times they're just plain gross.
I was extremely unimpressed with the vast majority of the NFL owners I got to spend time with. Dan Snyder is someone I talked to, and I'm sure he's a watcher of the show. He's the owner of the Redskins.
He did an interview on this program once on the Q&A
really?
Cafe.
How'd that
he came.
Go?
It was so, I don't know if any of you were there. It was so interesting because I was amazed that the PR department of the Redskins let him do it.
Right.
It was when we were still at Nathan's. And he's a diminutive person, and he came and he sort of sat in the back, and we did the interviews in the middle of the room, and he had to come and I would be opposite of him. And we had this little kind of booth in the middle of the room that had once been, in the glory days of the 80s, a record booth. But he kept retreating into it.
Yeah.
But the thing is, he was making people laugh. He was endearing. He was passionate. I think he was very candid.
Right.
I imagine the PR team were groaning, why did we ever let him do this? But the thing that always sticks with me, one of the stories he told in that interview was how sometimes the night before a game he sleeps in the owner's box.
Wow, I wish I'd heard that for the book. That's a great detail.
And I was like, how can you be that kind of sweet, nice guy who goes and sleeps in the owner's box?
What a weird thing to do. Like, why? Like, is there like,
because
doesn't he want to be home?
Because he loves it so much.
But the game doesn't start till the next day, and he's got this mansion.
He just loved being there.
That's so cool.
He just loved
Does he realize it's a terrible stadium?
But he was driven by a boyhood love of this team.
It's amazing that he said that. I have to find that.
But then how could he bungle his popularity
Well, I mean, so you found him endearing, it sounds like.
In that interview.
Which is why he's so beloved by everyone in Washington.
Yeah, exactly.
And beyond, right?
No, it was, I think everybody there was shocked.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I've lived here for, almost 20 years. And, he is the one, dislike of Dan Snyder is about as bipartisan and source of agreement as we have in this city, right?
It's sort of like national dislike of the Patriots.
Yes, exactly. But
it as a sport.
People, even people who love the Redskins and want them to win really would love to vote him out of office. And I think the vast majority of these NFL owners, they're not going to be term limited anytime soon, but I compare them to politicians in many ways.
Absolutely. But they've got so much control.
Yes, but a lot of them, if they had to stand for re-election, would never be re-elected in their markets. So I interviewed him about a week after the Redskins were eliminated by the Packers in the playoffs about 2-3 years ago. And he wasn't, I'd expected the worst because he's got a terrible reputation. He does some really ham-handed things. He's messed up a whole bunch. I've heard everything, read everything, and much of it seems to ring true. But he seemed very sheepish, very not comfortable in his skin, not comfortable talking to certainly a reporter, but really a human being. He just
did Tony Wiley have to sit on your shoulder while you? That is the press.
Tony Wiley is the
guy
head of PR for the Redskins. Yeah, he doesn't like me now. He was very So Tony Wiley, I think, what happened? Oh, okay. So I interviewed Dan Snyder. They all insist on being called Mr. So-and-so. He wants to be called Mr.
Yeah, Mr. Cook. Remember Jack Kent Cook? All the reporters called Mr. Cook.
First thing you learn when you go to work at the NFL, by the way, is always refer to the owners as Mr. So-and-so. And they're almost all men. They're the few women that own NFL teams are almost entirely widows or
And do they own them
heiresses.
outright?
Often not.
Yeah,
there's often a big court case involved. So the woman, Gail Benson, I think is her name, who is now the owner of the New Orleans Saints.
Right.
Her husband, Tom Benson, owned the New Orleans Saints for a long time. He died last year. And so she was I think she's like his second or third wife. She was in all kinds of litigation with the kids. That's sort of a familiar story around the NFL. And how women,
So it's the guys who have the reins on the teams.
Yeah, although and a lot of them are very old, and obviously they're very rich. And actually, 4 NFL owners since I started doing this book died, in the last year. Partly because they're so old, and
partly because of your book.
No, this is before the book. I don't have blood on my hands just on that regard. But no, Paul Allen of the Seahawks, Bob McNair of the Texans. Tom Benson of the Saints and Alex Spanos of the Chargers all died in the last year, and all their teams made the playoffs. So someone who was interviewing me said, so the key, if you want to make the playoffs and you're in the NFL, make sure your owner is dies off. So I'm kidding. I'm not.
But anyway, Dan Snyder and the Redskins.
I'm not giving anyone any ideas.
I feel like there's such an opportunity there to win the fans over that there's a resistance to it. I don't get it.
Well, here's the thing. Washington football right now is a major problem for the NFL. And the fact is, because they're just tanking in popularity in an extremely important national hub, which is Washington. And And the Redskins winning people over. I mean, the Redskins had won over Washington and the whole league for decades. I mean, this was a marquee, winning, extremely profitable,
It was so much fun.
Beloved franchise, right up until pretty much, Dan Snyder bought the team.
Yeah, that was it.
And now you have. I mean, they're bleeding attendance figures. I mean, going to FedEx Field is not an easy or particularly pleasant experience, even if you don't like the Redskins. I think, you could say, the name is offensive to a lot of people, and they would say, well, polls show that no one cares and Native Americans don't care. The fact of the matter is a lot of people care. And when you're running a business and, there are probably millions of people who are somewhat offended or put off by your refusal to change the name, it is a problem. And the other thing is politics. I mean, Dan Snyder has done a lot to promote bad will around here. He is pretty closely aligned with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And in such a deep blue city, and then Maryland and then Northern Virginia, I mean, that's a problem too. I mean, the Post had a story about 6 weeks ago about how there was some kind of plan afoot to renovate RFK that Snyder or to rebuild a place on the site of RFK.
That is the story that never ends.
Right, but Snyder was trying to get some kind of appropriation through, the then Republican-controlled Congress and then Republican, now Republican President Donald Trump, and his close ties to Trump, and they were trying to get something in the budget that would basically earmark for this stadium. And I mean, that Post story came out. I have never seen Democrats, Republicans, within the Washington Post readership area around here, uniformly appalled. I mean, by the notion that, first of all, there'd be any public funding at a time when we have such a budget crisis, for a football stadium, but also to help this guy.
Yeah. Do you think if he changed the name, that might have been different?
Maybe at the margins. I mean, I think the other part of this, by the way, is that the Capitals and the Wizards. I mean, the Capitals and the Nationals, especially, are very ascendant as local sports brands. I mean, my kids, my daughters, they consider themselves Washington fans and not the Redskins.
Yeah, and it was for those of us who grew up here, and then you raise your children here, and you're trying to tell them what it was like in the '80s when we actually liked the football team.
Yeah.
It was marvelous with the Caps to say, see, this is what it was like.
Oh yeah.
You know, we had year after year of this.
Absolutely.
But Snyder, what was his bromance with Tom Cruise? Did that ever?
I have no idea. Yeah, didn't he
Remember that they were doing everything together? They were
I don't
taking.
pretend to understand
Tom Cruise
how
was
people like
recruiting
Tom
him
Cruise
for Scientology.
or Dan Snyder.
And then maybe it did or didn't work.
I wonder if maybe Scientology would do him good. I don't know.
Dan Snyder, if you're a Scientologist, will you let us know, please?
Yeah, or maybe. I can't comment
but on a business level,
Sure.
What difference does it make to the other NFL owners if the Redskins aren't doing well?
It makes a huge difference because, one, again, just the PR perspective, it's like you have a lot of opinion leaders, a lot of influencers, a lot of politicians, obviously, whose center of gravity is Washington. And just to have such bad will bubbling up from that franchise where so many people are thinking about or living, it is a bad problem. The other thing is they're just they were a revenue machine for many, many years. And
they're not now?
They're less so.
Yeah.
I mean, their attendance
But that's on merchandise, right?
It's on merchandise, but it's on attendance. It's on, a lot of intangible things. But no, I mean, there's just not a lot of good feeling around that, and it's being reflected in a lot of the numbers. So, look, I mean, the NFL is going to get 60% of its revenue every year from a national broadcast contract. So there's a revenue sharing. It's like a socialism for billionaires, right? So you own an NFL team, you can basically just turn the control of the team over to a ham sandwich, and you are going to guaranteed
money's going to fall
tons
on you.
of money because the broadcast contracts are so lucrative that you're guaranteed 60% of the league's revenues, which is a huge number. So the rest, which you can keep for yourself, is your ticket gate, your merchandise, other revenue streams. And Snyder's been very, very, you could say ruthless, you could say price gouging, you could say savvy, whatever you want to use. He's made a ton of money off of the team, and he's squeezed all kinds of revenue out of the Redskins, and I think a lot of other owners sort of grudgingly respected him for that because it helps the league. But that seems to be shutting off quite a bit.
Do you think that the team will come back into the city? I mean, were you able to get any? I mean, do you keep up on that story?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be really tough. I mean, first of all, I mean, the league would like it. I think.
I think the fans would.
The fans would like it, but they don't want to pay for it. I mean, as a taxpayer, I wouldn't want to pay for it. I mean, I think. And by the way, Dan Snyder's probably worth what, like $8-10 billion or something. He can afford to build a stadium. I mean, it is. I mean, there is this crown jewel of a stadium that the NFL is so excited about being built in Los Angeles. It's going to be ready in 2 years. That is, it's just going to be like the greatest stadium ever, supposedly. And Stan Kroenke, the owner of the Rams, he married a Walmart heiress, I think. He's worth something like $12 to $15 billion, and he's basically spending $4 billion to build this like Shangri-La out in Inglewood that is going to be like the West Coast capital of the NFL.
But it's not even done yet as they go into the Super
It will be,
Bowl,
though.
right?
It will be. It's LA. I mean, there's a whole thing in the book about like the battle for LA. But I mean, look, if Dan Snyder wants to spend his money on a bunch of land in a place that's not going to completely screw up, like
our lives.
Our lives. I mean, sure, it'd be fun to if there's a local team. I mean, just like the Nationals are here, it'd be nice if like they played downtown, because I don't want to go out to, what is it, Landover or Hyattsville, whatever it is.
God.
Is it Landover?
Well, what used to be Raljon.
Right. Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. The good old days.
Who among the owners is close with Roger Goodell?
Yeah.
Do they like him?
They like him for one reason, and that he makes them a ton of money. Now, Roger Goodell, like Dan Snyder, is another person who has just cratering approval ratings, according to fans and, in Goodell's case, players. So Roger Goodell is like a Senate majority leader, to sort of put it in Washington.
He is the son of a senator.
He is the son of former Senator Charles Goodell. That was his. He was a congressman from New York who was appointed to Bobby Kennedy's Senate seat in New York after Bobby Kennedy was killed. And Charles Goodell was a favorite of Richard Nixon. He was a moderate Republican. Governor Rockefeller and then President Nixon, basically put him in that seat. And he then became like really the first Republican senator to turn against the Vietnam War. Yeah. And Roger, who was then 9, 10 years old, was sort of learning politics at his knee. I mean, he was always running around with him. And he saw firsthand, one, what it's like to make a courageous move, which for a Republican senator in the 60s, to turn against the Vietnam War and to, infuriate the president who essentially put you there was a big deal. And, he essentially lost his job over it because he was primaried and lost re-election. So, so Roger Goodell, a lot of people at the league compared him to Mitt Romney, actually, in that he's the son of an iconic sort of political figure of that era who he revered. I mean, Mitt Romney revered George Romney, who, like Charles Goodell, was a moderate Republican, had some pretty cutting edge, political views, in the 60s for a Republican. And, but Mitt never really felt terribly comfortable in his skin as a public person, and Goodell is sort of the same way. But Goodell, like Mitt Romney, is very, very good at making money and making a lot of other people money.
Yeah, surprising job security, doesn't it?
Well, it's not surprising when you know that your single biggest.
Well, I think from the outside it seems surprising.
It is,
because
but the 32 owners are his bosses.
They're all that matters.
Right, and if you're the Senate Majority Leader, you can be despised, wherever.
By the populace.
But, if you can get reelected in your state.
Right, and Roger doesn't have to worry about getting reelected in his state.
And believe me, if he did, he would lose so badly. First of all, he could write off all of New England, all of New Orleans, all of Baltimore, all of like St. Louis, Oakland, San Diego. I mean, then that's just like off the top of my head.
Has he ever been approached for a political career, I wonder?
There was talk at the height of his popularity, which was maybe like around 2010, when the league was doing well, and he's getting a lot of good press. She was on the cover of Time magazine with the headline "The Enforcer," because there was a lot of pretty high-profile player discipline cases, and he was really coming down hard on like the Michael Vick story. Remember Michael Vick, who was the quarterback for the Eagles and Falcons, first Falcons, who was convicted of running a dogfighting ring, and Goodell basically banned him from the league, and this all played really, really well. And then, like, I think, like, who was it? It was one of the dopier owners. Let's not say. I think maybe Jim Irsay of the Colts. He's a real piece of work. He said, this man could be president one day, and yeah, there was talk, but that has not really been the case.
It'd be such a pay cut.
It'd be such a pay cut. Yeah.
How much does he make?
He
now?
makes now. He's a $200 million contract over the next 4 or 5 years. So he's guaranteed basically 40, 50 million. I mean, depending on bonuses
and a jet.
And what?
And a jet.
Oh, he's got a jet. He's got. He's got
an entourage.
He's got an entourage. He got, and yeah, he's got the private Pilates and yoga classes. He's always telling you how much he worked out that day and how it's more than you. I mean, he's one of these people who just talks endlessly.
The culture of the whole football environment, especially among these owners, that the young girlfriends.
Oh, wives.
Well, and I wondered if it's just part of the, it's like they have these young fit football players that are theirs, and then they have to have the equivalent in their girlfriends.
Yeah, it's like different kinds of trophies, right?
It's right, and it's so out of touch with where we are.
I would say.
But that doesn't matter to them, does it?
Being in touch is not something I mean, look, again, like politicians, they don't really have to worry about.
No, and they can afford it. But, that brings me to something, though, that I think is, or two things. We'll get to both of them. Kapernick and Concussions. That is where we are as a society, and they're not.
Right.
Where is Colin Kaepernick today? What is the status of his... He's not, but what is his... litigation status?
It's ongoing. Yeah, I mean, Colin Kaepernick is suing the National Football League for collusion because after he was let go by the San Francisco 49ers after 2 seasons ago, and it caused all kinds of controversy for refusing to stand during the national anthem. His lawyers are suing the league and the 32 owners for what he says is colluding against him getting a job. And
is that true?
I will say, I mean, it is ongoing. It certainly looks like it. I mean, it certainly looks like he's been blackballed, and I think...
How close has he come to anybody talking to him about hiring him?
There have been a few reports that, I mean, he had a couple of tryouts.
Like even on a practice squad?
Yeah, no, but he hasn't gotten there. I mean, this is a starting quarterback in the Super Bowl, not even, 5 years ago.
And he's young.
He's young. I mean, look, there is a business calculation here, whereas if you're running a football team, and you're basically probably talking about a backup quarterback at this point, is it worth the distraction, which is the single worst word you can throw around a football coach or a general manager or a football team, right? So, I mean, there's definitely going to be baggage that comes with him around, press attention that you don't want, questions that people are going to have to deal with, and, it'd be different, and it would be a maybe more interesting thought exercise if this were Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes who were kneeling before the game and pissing off a whole bunch of people. But look, there's no question on the merits. I mean, Colin Kaepernick should be in the league. I mean,
I read a story. It was very touching about how he still works out every day. He still practices. I don't know whether it's that he goes to colleges or high schools, but he works out with teams. And then he does an enormous amount of charitable work.
Yeah, no, he gave like $1 million of his salary like a couple of years ago.
But he stays ready.
He stays ready.
Stays physically ready if somebody gives him the call.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's not right. I think if Roger Goodell could snap his fingers and say, please put him on a roster. But
that was interesting. That was something you said in the book, that actually that Goodell in a quiet way was sympathetic to the kneeling, that it wasn't...
Yeah, he would never say that publicly, but here's the thing. And there's a small but pretty strong piece of Roger Goodell that understands principle like this and understands, taking courageous positions, and largely because of his own father's experience, taking, what was then an extremely courageous and extremely controversial position on the war. And Roger Goodell to this day has a framed picture in his office, or a framed copy in his office, of the Vietnam Resolution Act that his father helped write in the Senate in like 1968 or 69 or whenever it was. Roger Goodell is sort of an old style kind of Northeast Republican, maybe in the Nelson Rockefeller. I don't know about Nelson Rockefeller,
Which,
but I mean,
in this
it's a
day and
kind of
age, are
republicanism.
jumping to the other party.
Yeah, it does. These people don't generally exist anymore. I mean, there's like one member of
I know, we're in an
Congress.
era where Bill Kristol's beginning to sound like a lefty. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, Susan Collins, I think, told me that she, the moderate Republican senator from Maine, told me that she is, I think she's she's the only one of like 32 members of Congress who's a Republican from all the New England states. And the only member of the Senate, Republican in the Senate, north of, Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania. So, that's a lot of seats. I mean, it's like, and it's not, you can look at the South and it's the exact mirror image of that in the other direction. So,
do you think Kaepernick will ever play again?
Increasingly, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, with every day, every year that passes, it's probably less likely.
The concussions, it's such a, troubling reality. I don't know how many of you saw the movie Concussion. I think that kind of gave it a fair perspective, and there's been an enormous amount of reporting.
Yeah.
And the degree to which players themselves are willing to come forward. But the league has sort of figured out a policy on this and a public approach, and they want to leave it there.
Yeah, I mean, look,
They're afraid of making the game too safe, right?
I mean, maybe in some ways. I mean, look, football is a violent game. I don't think anyone who watches
Not
it
as violent as it used to be.
Not as violent as it used to be, but it's pretty violent. I mean, you
you
can do some serious damage to yourself if you play football under the current rules. Maybe.
What did you call it? An organized car crash?
Like, well, Tom Brady says that
called
every Sunday I take part in a planned car crash or something, which doesn't sound like a lot of fun, especially if you're 41 years old. Now, there are a couple of positions, like if you're a quarterback or you're a kicker or a punter, you're probably more of a particular, you're less at risk than if you're a linebacker or a safety or something. But I mean, this is like the lingering existential problem with football. And again, it's because there is concern about concussions and because there's greater awareness of what playing football can do to your brain. It doesn't mean, a lot of people aren't going to watch the Super Bowl next Sunday, and it doesn't mean football is going to die in 20 years, despite, some people think like this will be like boxing.
But it affects downstream. It affects parents with children and
all true.
All the youth leagues.
Which is why I think 40 years might be a more realistic. I think it'll take longer. And here's what we're talking about. We're talking about the seed corn of players, tomorrow's players. And not only do you have parents not wanting their kids to play, you have, and this is a huge piece that doesn't get talked about a lot, but you have insurance companies that are just refusing to insure high school, Pop Warner, middle school football, even college football in many cases, because you need insurance if you're gonna organize a football team.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just for whatever, I don't understand the insurance agent, business, but that's just a huge problem, and that more than anything has gotten a lot of cities and schools and areas to sort of cancel their programs. So there's a lot, and look, the league is terrified of two things more than anything. Well, they're scared of like a lot of things, but one is some catastrophic injury, like in which a player doesn't get up, like ever, like basically dies on the field, and that's happened before.
Have they died on the field?
Yeah, 1970.
We know they've been carried off with horrible, life-altering injuries.
It used to happen a fair amount. I mean, it happened in the early 20th century a lot before there were rule changes.
But not on Sunday Night Football.
No, but I mean, there was a player for the Detroit Lions who died on the field in 1971, but it was
a long time ago.
I think he had a heart attack. It was not like from some violent blow or something, but the opening scene in the book was last year's Super Bowl, and I don't think a lot of people remember this, but the second quarter, the Patriots had a receiver named Brandon Cooks who played 1 year for the team. Probably their best receiver, one of their best receivers. He's on the Rams now, so he'll be playing against them. But he caught a pass and was just absolutely laid out on the field by Malcolm Jenkins of the Eagles, and didn't move for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And I was in the stadium. It was in Minnesota, and there was just all of a sudden just total silence, and the guy just wasn't moving. And sometimes you just, there are these catastrophic injuries you see on the field where players start to kneel, like the silence gets greater, nothing happens.
Cut to commercial.
Well, yeah, there is that, but you just don't know what's going to
No, I
happen.
know.
And
It's horrifying.
so there's that, but there's also, there could be some legislation. There could be some
It's the
regulation.
moments like that where the casual football fan like myself goes, why am I watching this?
Well, and a lot of people, and then so he gets up after a few minutes. He's declared out for the rest of the game with a very bad concussion. So the rest of us can sort of get on with our fun, and you could sort of
not be reminded.
well, not be reminded. You could sort of put that off back in the denial space of our brains, and you could sort of feel the stadium coming to life again. And it's all right. And so so let's get back to the live action, but. So there's that. There's regulation. There's some kind of litigation. I mean, there's a lot of sort of threats.
You
to the golden
interviewed
goose.
players who have been public about CTE, about their experiences, and I mean, it's amazing. I mean, I forget who the player is in there. He's an old timer, but he was talking about all his memories of just being on the field with the.
Jim Kelly, Hall of Fame quarterback, No, I mean, you go to these Hall of Fame, and there's not a lot. I tried to stay. I mean, there's been so much public testimony about the toll of playing football, and I didn't want to overdo it with this. But you go to these Hall of Fame induction
they're
ceremonies.
Not happy.
Well, I mean, these are people in their gold jackets. They're all Hall of Famers, and they're all royalty. They go back to Canton, Ohio. They walk in a parade. Everyone wants their autograph. They're celebrated, but
they're wounded.
You talk to them about their health, and it's usually not a pretty picture.
Speaking of one's health, you had quite a night with the owner of the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
It wasn't clear to me whether you were in a van or a bus.
We were on one of the 3 Dallas Cowboys buses.
You were on a bus.
Jerry Jones, he invited me down to Dallas to interview him. Jerry Jones is a very high-powered, high-profile owner of the Cowboys. Dan Snyder's, probably his best friend in the league.
Crazy.
For some reason, they're like divisional rivals and,
So
ancient rivals, but they're, he's taken Dan Snyder under his wing. And Dan Snyder, there's some really vulgar descriptions that other owners have given me about Dan Snyder's relationship to Jerry Jones that I won't repeat here.
But he was not drinking with you. It was
No,
just
he
the
was
two
not.
of you and a publicist and a...
Yeah, the publicist who was derelict in his responsibilities to not
Clearly.
have one of the butlers on the bus just keep filling our large cups with Johnny Walker Blue, which is Jerry's favorite drink, and he's got a whole closet stocked with Johnny Walker Blue. And
bus.
so there's like a 4 or 5 hour interview, and I was not in very good condition after like the 3rd or 4th refill.
Didn't he just leave you on the bus?
He did.
Out?
Now look, my tape recorder worked perfectly to the chagrin after the fact of I don't know about Jerry, but certainly the publicist and everything. So that was quite a chapter. But he left me on the bus, and I think like one of my last memories is him leaving me on the bus. He invited me to take a nap before I attempted to do anything, and so I lay down on the couch, and next thing I know, Jerry's like running out of the bus saying, "Let's go." And he went back to they're at a golf tournament that the Cowboys were sponsoring, and he said, "Let's go get us some cigars." And he ordered beers for the whole golf club, and it was crazy. But so this is why I immediately, when I was able to stand again, got back on a plane and came back to my boring little life here in Washington.
It's stunning when you see somebody who can function like that on a regular basis.
Yeah, function is a little generous, but I think, he's quite a character. I mean, he is first of all, I will say this, and he was inducted into the Hall of Fame like 2 summers ago, and he is a Hall of Fame drinker. I mean, this is like, the name of that chapter is, "Put this man's liver in Canton, Ohio." I am not even a middleweight drinker. I mean, I'm not a lightweight, but I'm somewhere. What's between lightweight and middleweight? Welterweight. I'm a welterweight, which is fine.
Thank you.
At my age, I'm not that old, but he's like 74, 76.
That's when it's really amazing.
It's a force of nature. Yeah.
I guess it's when you have billions of dollars. They can get their blood changed.
I said he had like all these so Johnny Walker Blue, like they cost like $250, $300 a bottle. And I said, God, you got a lot of bottles of Johnny Walker Blue in that closet. And he goes, "Yeah, I can afford it. What I can't always afford is the things it makes me do." Which I thought was pretty funny.
And then that brings up the young girlfriends.
Well, yeah, I tried not to bring that up.
Yeah, well, yeah. Our time is up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I know. No, it's been it's gone fast because it's been so good. It's much like reading the book. It's a page turner. You specialize in page turners. Now you've got to go back to politics.
That's unfortunately what I do all day.
What are you
No,
working?
I'm doing a couple magazine profiles. It's too early to talk about.
Yeah,
but,
no, you don't want to jinx it.
And I'll do another book. I just don't know what it's going to be about.
It'll find you.
It'll find me. But I mean, there was some pressure to get back to my day job just because
Yeah.
it's sort of a big story, and that's sort of what I do.
But you'll never watch a football game the same again, right?
No, I'll watch football. Talk to me after Brady and Belichick retire.
Okay, I'll do that.
Now, look, I mean, here's the thing about football is like you had these great games last Sunday, like 2 overtime
They were
games,
great
and yet, of course,
games.
all anyone was talking about is this major screw up in New Orleans. But yeah, it's like football just sort of survives in spite of itself.
Let's hope the Super Bowl is as exciting.
Yeah, they have a
That's
hard couple of tough acts to follow.
Yeah, no, that's true. Thank you.
Thanks,
This
Carol.
has been great.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you, everyone.
Thanks for coming.
And we'll see you next time.